Welcome to another Rust and WebAssembly working group, everybody. Working group meeting. As far as RFC triage goes, I believe we have one RFC in FCP and one proposed for FCP, or maybe just entered FCP. But I haven't grabbed those links yet. I think actually maybe one just merged today.
I don't know about that, but I know that depending on NPM and enable depending on NPM dependencies is an FCP. It should be finishing today, actually.
Yeah, so it was 7 days ago, so I think I can hit that merge button right now.
That works too.
Bam, doing it live. All right, so yeah. Let me throw that in.
And otherwise, the amendment to the RFC process and the watch and serve subcommands are currently in FCP, or proposed for FCP. Oh, and the roadmap actually is an FCP. That's actually a big important one.
Is the roadmap 7 days now?
It actually is. If you'd like to do it again live.
Nice. Should I do a share screen? No, too much work. Here. Bam. Okay. Oh no. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I just missed clicking a few times. All right, I think that's enough theatrics. Thanks for your patience, everybody. Yeah, so those two that are in FCP, please take a look and share your comments on them. Jumping into status updates. So the glue toolkit has been seeing some action, but it is hard to summarize the action because it has not been very pull requesty so far. It's been a lot of discussion and kind of figuring out what is the scope and kind of how do you want to design each of these crates in the toolkit. And I think we've come to like some pretty good consensus so far. If I were to like very quickly summarize, it would be like wherever possible, we should kind of create these crates in an onion layer approach, where like at the very bottom of the onion is like the JSSys or WebSys bindings, and then like just above that is the like the version that instead of taking a JSSys function as a callback or a WASM binding closure, takes like a generic F, kind of the way that most Rust function taking APIs work. And then kind of a layer above that would be something like futures or potentially signals. And then, we haven't even really got to any proposals for anything above that, but there's like kind of this vague idea of like maybe something that is actually, not a translation of the web API into the thing, but like actually like a higher level. So this would be more like a virtual DOM library or something like that. So I think that's where we are, and there have been a couple of PRs that merged, like some timer stuff and like kind of documenting these things that we've been discussing in issues. But yeah, that's where we are. All right. Any updates on the multi-threading stuff?
So we did actually fix landed in the Firefox or in Nightly for Rust to like correct some multi-threaded allocator issues, and I tested again the Rayon example, and actually it works and is just as fast as the previous iteration. And so I'll be cleaning that up and sending a pull request soon, and hopefully we can start getting that into Rayon. And then once we actually get an example, we can start talking about like what's an official crate for reusing Rayon on the web, because right now it's kind of a bunch of hacks and not exactly the easiest thing to use.
Sweet. Debugging story. I still have a to-do on my list to start plugging the debugging infrastructure into Walrus, or at least write down a plan. I printed out the whole documentation on LLVM's debug info because I feel like they have some wise nuggets of wisdom to share. But I've only read the first page, so unless anyone's done any miraculous debugging stuff that I'm not aware of, I think that's it. toolchain and workflow polish.
So I have a couple of things on this, and I think Draeger also started a couple of things. I will have a PR that removes binary install from the WebAssembly repo and reworks it just a little bit because that's getting ready for a PR for getting cargo generate bundled into WebAssembly. And it turns out that the binary install crate was built very well for like when you need the versions to be very specific, but for cargo generate, we just need the most up to date. So there's going to be a couple edits for that. And then this is vaguely related to workflow, but not exactly on WebAssembly. There's discussion on this marketing PR that I had on the WebAssembly repo about some new stuff for a landing page. It kind of has 3 calls to action that talk about the targets that we have for our toolchain and just kind of helps expose them. A lot of the motivation for this is the fact that there's an overwhelming sense from people that in order to use this toolchain, you need to use Webpack, which you don't have to. So I have taken the code out of the WebAssembly repo and will be making a PR later today to the Rust WASM homepage. And so that's going to move the blog to its own page.
Get published on WASM-Bindgen?
Yes, so
Yep.
it's now in both WASM-Pack and WASM-Bindgen. So you can say --web to WASM-Bindgen or --target web to WASM-Pack.
Brilliant. I missed that. I'll look into that. Cool.
I will say, Alex, for the changelog for WASM-Pack, I did try to look up when that --web flag for WASM-Bindgen landed, and I could not find it. So maybe if there's a way to like help surface that a little bit more.
Yeah, this is where the changelog is pretty terse right now for WASM-Bindgen, but it was pretty recent. But I think maybe I'll go back and edit in some more wording around that because it didn't have we haven't really done like a big splash or like we didn't have a lot of messaging around that, so it was a pretty quiet release, even though it was a pretty major feature.
Yeah. Well, as we trade off doing releases of each other's tools, maybe I can give some changelog love to WASM-Bindgen.
I suspect so.
Yeah, so that's the update for me. And yeah, I'll make that PR to the website and then I'll share it out in all the channels because, you know, marketing and design, there's always lots of feedback. So please give us that feedback. That'll be great.
Cool. Is that all of the toolchain updates? I disconnected for a moment.
Draeger, I saw you pick up something. I don't know if you want to mention what you're working on. I guess not.
Okay. Any updates as far as the monitoring, profiling, and testing infrastructure?
No.
Okay. Any other working groupy things before we move on to office hour questions? Okay. So I can't see. Oh, it's going. I think this is Surma. Hey, would you like to ask your question?
I just updated the link, and it seems like I pasted the wrong one, so nobody was able to look at this beforehand. So I had this entire experiment a while ago where I was trying to use OxyPNG, which is a Rust port of an old C tool called OptiPNG that optimizes PNG images. And it's really great. And OxyPNG is like better code quality. It uses threading. And I wanted to use it in WASM for the Squoosh project that I'm working on. And it turned out I stumbled over a lot of things where I think I wanted to at least hear out if you have thought about these problems at all. So the first one is that, as far as I know, that WASM syscall is currently considered non-standardized and like somewhat of an under-the-hood feature. I'd love to see that get standardized. I think it's extremely useful, and I realize it's a bit weird in terms of the platform triple, like WASM32 unknown, that we probably would have to introduce something new for that. But it's also proven incredibly useful to just be able to use Rust libraries in WASM land. So that would be the first thing that would be interesting to me. And the other thing that I was looking into is that because this library uses threads, which we don't have in WebAssembly yet, or Rust for WebAssembly, if I could just shim them like polyfill threads in a way, basically just run the thread function right away, synchronously, without actually using threads, so that like semantically and functionally it stays the same with no actual parallelism. But that basically led me down the entire route of having to compile the standard library just to get the shim in there, basically. And I was wondering if there's interest or any thoughts around enabling a mechanism in Rust to like shadow a standard lib module with something that is provided by the current crate. And yeah, just curious about these thoughts and if there's anything being worked on where I could weigh in or help out with something along those lines.
I would say regarding the WASM syscall stuff, I think what we're waiting for here is more guidance from the WASM community group. Like, for example, there's the start of the reference sysroot, and then I imagine on top of that, there's going to be like proper syscalls and everything after that. But like, my understanding of WASM syscall is that like one person just did it as a proof of concept and because it was useful for them, and like it's not something that we want to make like a foundation on top of, or even like deal with or maintain. I think Alex probably knows more about the history of that than I do.
Yeah, the main thing here is kind of the standardization aspect of the we don't want to, as like the Rust community, be pioneering a new standard which hasn't necessarily been like thoroughly vetted or thoroughly like designed. Because Nick is exactly right. This was just added during a PR, and it was never intended to become stable, just for a proof of concept to see how it could work. And so what the thinking here is we want to enable everyone else to do this. So like you can. Like it's not nearly the same user experience, but you can always make your own standard library on Crates.io for like WASM that has like its own set of syscalls, its own set of imports, runtime, and all that good stuff. But this is kind of what WASM Bindgen is, but like it's a pretty big investment. And it's like it's not nearly as nice if it is the standard library. But so that's the general idea: is have experimentation there. And so coming into the standard library itself and becoming part of a standard target would involve standardization far beyond just us, like as the Rust and WebAssembly working group, but like probably the community group buy-in or like buy-in from like other languages like C and C++ or like Go and Blazor and all those stuff. And so like having a agreed upon set of syscalls or an agreed upon set of imports would kind of be what would be needed for that. But in the meantime, the use case for taking existing software and just running it as is not really so much what the unknown target is intended for. That's actually much more in the wheelhouse of the unknown Emscripten target, because Emscripten is all about taking your existing application, compiling it to the web, and running it as is with a few minor tweaks as necessary. And so if that's the goal, was to take all these existing functionality, the Emscripten target is definitely the way to go. I mean, it obviously has trade-offs both ways, but specifically for that use case, that's the best fit.
All right, gotcha.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. To be honest, I think Xargo and things were already making that part quite easy, because I just had to recompile with a feature enabled. So if I wanted to go down the route and use a non-standard feature, it was actually quite easy to do so. So yeah, I guess I am more interested in the shadowing of standard lib modules in a crate, if that's been thought about in the past.
I just linked to a PR, which allows you to recompile standard lib without recompiling everything in Rust. So hopefully, at least the Xargo sort of recompilation experience will be a bit nicer in the near future.
Very cool.
Hopefully.
All right, I'll take a look at that. That sounds very good.
Yeah, I'm extremely excited for that PR. I guess RFC, but yeah. And WebAssembly gets mentioned in it several times, so.
So I would say like the whole shadowing thing, I don't know if anyone's particularly brought that up, but it's definitely the sort of thing that I imagine would need an RFC and discussion with the larger Rust community. But the other thing I wanted to point out was I don't think that running a function immediately that was supposed to be a thread is, I mean, like you'll run into deadlocks fairly quickly, I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, this is not a generic solution. This was tailored towards the program I was working with. So that's why I think like this would be something that the crate would provide itself, because only the crate would know what is a feasible shim in that context, right? So it's not something where like, here's a generic polyfill for threads in WASM, right? That would probably be almost impossible to do. But sometimes for simplicity, it could be nice if you're just like, you know what, the standard library is doing too much or is relying on things that I don't actually have, and give me an easy way to hook in and replace it.
It kind of feels to me like that's sort of the domain that Futures is currently targeting, where it's like, here's this one unit of computation, and then you have an executor that sort of says like, oh, we're single-threaded, we're multi-threaded, this is how we like run them over the underlying system. So hopefully, as future, at least this is how I view it, as futures become more widespread, more standardized, these kinds of things will just be like, oh, we switch out the executor and now it runs in a single thread target, such as WASM.
Yeah, that's true. If the library was written with futures, it would actually have been much easier to make that work. That's true.
That's a delightful future, Yash. I'm just glad that you shared that. I like thinking about the program that way. That's great.
I think this is also a case where a lot of times if your goal is for the unknown target and kind of the benefits there, you probably will need to have changes landed in upstream crates themselves to prepare themselves for something like this. And so like internally crates using Rayon right now is not a great story because like Rayon doesn't work naturally on the unknown target. But if the crate kind of gives you the hooks that you can run Rayon for it, then you can kind of figure out how to run it externally kind of on its own, or like, and you can do something different in WASM. And so that's where a lot of crates, they will need tweaks to be more compatible with WASM, either in runtime aspects or just their own internal implementations to compile it all. And at least from historical experience, I can say that modifying a crate is way easier than modifying the standard library, just procedurally.
Yeah.
Especially the language. Modifying the language is even harder.
All right, cool. That's been very insightful. That will be my first office hour topic. I don't want to block anyone else when I ask something, but I have another one.
I think go for it.
All right. It's in a similar realm. It's the from WASM ABI trait that exists in WASM BindGen, I think. And I've recently looked into that a little bit more. I don't actually know why, but it seems, as far as I can tell, that I'm not able to implement it myself as a crate author currently. I don't remember what the error was, but for some reason I ended up at a dead end. I was wondering if this will change, because it is very useful to be able to define myself how values go from JavaScript to my Rust structures and vice versa generically.
So right now, you technically can have an external implementation. It's kind of really wonky to do so, and it's got a terrible interface, and it's not intended to be used at all by anyone. It's only for like kind of internals of the macro, the WASM BindGen macro right now. But I do suspect we're probably going to want to stabilize this over time. One of the gotchas is that you really do want like fine-grained control in some circumstances over how exactly your data is marshaled between JavaScript and WebAssembly. But one of the problems is that you're fundamentally limited by what the CLI itself does. So like the WASM BindGen program will go and actually emit all the JavaScript, and that has some certain set of functionality which is entirely non-extensible. And so trying to figure out how to bridge that gap where like you do want to customize it, but you still have to always customize it within the context of what WASM BindGen already knows. Like you can't have like an arbitrary like macro, which like WASM BindGen will load it at its own time and like dynamically run code, figure out what JS to generate and stuff like that. So that's like, if we wanted to kind of officially stabilize the from WASM API tree, although it is currently technically stable, it's got a lot of documentation saying please don't use this because it probably will change. We would probably try and fix issues like that and make a better API that is a little more targeted towards like anyone can implement this, but like these are the unknown limitations and things like that. So it'll work today, but it's not easy and may not actually solve the use case if you want to configure kind of that boundary a little more than what WebAssembly currently supports.
All right, I'll go back to it and see, because if that is technically possible, then I must have done something wrong. I'll take a look and see. If you want to, I'll just write on my feedback, and then we can, if you want to fill that into stabilizing that, use it as some information or not. I'll leave it up to you.
Yeah, and like if you want to file an issue or just ping us on the Discord channel, either way is fine. We can help out there.
Alex, I was going to say, I get this question kind of a lot. And so I wonder if it might not be useful to have an issue where we kind of do the brain dump of the tricky bits about it, kind of like what you said. And like, to the extent that if there are people out there who would be interested in championing it, like just kind of like making it an issue as something we can like point to folks.
Yeah, definitely.
So that they can see it. Because this is one of the questions I get the most at like meetups and stuff. It's very interesting.
Interesting, yeah. But no, yeah, totally. I would love to have a tracking issue. We're just, better documentation about this for what it currently is and what it currently does.
Yeah.
All right. Any final topics?
I did want to. We talked about last time about the sprint and having like a 6-week sprint. Do you want to try and follow up and like review some stuff that's been happening or like status updates and things like that?
Yeah. Hopefully. So I guess like I imagine that our existing status updates items would be a place where things could be slotted in.
That's also true.
I was thinking maybe we should do it every 2 weeks. So there would be 3 sets, just so that we have, I mean, maybe it's useful to have a status update where everyone goes, nothing's quite done yet. But give people some time to get the stuff done.
That's also fun. I'm down with that.
Also, I realized I actually have a topic, and since we have time, maybe it'd be worth saying. But I don't want to interrupt your status update bit. All right, so if you are an incredibly keen watcher of GitHub, you will have noticed that I pushed a branch of WasmPack called like Cloudflare Hack. This is because in order to use the Rust WASM toolchain on Cloudflare workers right now, full disclosure, I work for Cloudflare, but at least they pay me to work on all this stuff in open source, which is nice. In order to get the no modules target to work on a Cloudflare worker, you have to edit the generated JavaScript from WASM BindGen to remove one type check that it checks if it's like if path or module is the equivalent of a WebAssembly instance, and you just replace that with true. You can remove probably the whole conditional. So the question, which I am pretty sure will require an RFC and we probably won't solve, but it's worth introducing today, is would we be interested in supporting like proprietary targets in the toolchain? And I don't even know entirely how I feel about that, but it certainly would be easier to use the toolchain on Cloudflare workers if we didn't have to manually edit the JavaScript or tell a computer to manually edit it. So that's like kind of an open question. I don't know if people have like immediate feels or thoughts about that. I'm also trying to move Cloudflare workers to use ES6 modules, which would be much nicer than what they're doing right now. But yeah, I don't know what folks think.
Actually, I had a question. So actually, I did the exact same thing, but with Webpack. And actually, it turns out that it works pretty well. Could you please tell again what was the issue?
Oh, I mean, I should see what you got working, but you have to. It does a check on the WebAssembly module as to whether or not it's an instance of WebAssembly module or WebAssembly instance, and because the WebAssembly is a resource that's like added to the global, like the check fails, and so if you manually remove the check, then the no modules target works completely fine.
Mm.
But yeah, I'm trying to do a non-Webpack situation, so that might be it.
Yeah.
So you asked for opinions, and I would like to say that I think it's very cool. So something that I would want to do at some point, like if we can get this to work well enough, I'm imagining this thing where we can take Tide and the HTTP-service thing, and we could create an HTTP service layer for your Cloudflare thing, and then take Tide as is, just swap out the HTTP layer and just have it run in there. And then suddenly we have like, oh, you can run Tide on regular servers. You can run Tide inside of like Cloudflare workers. If we even get, the WASM service workers, you can run it there. I think that's a pretty cool line of experimentation. And if this enables that, I'd like to try it for sure.
I mean, speaking of getting Tide on this, I also think it opens up a new target for Glue. If you wanted to do all of that, but just do it in WebAssembly and Rust and WebAssembly instead. But again, for me, it was mostly like I know that like Rust will compile to Windows, right? And Windows is a proprietary target. But I didn't know if it would be something that people would go, ew, no, immediately to.
My thoughts on this would be that I feel like we have a lot to gain from having more widespread adoption, or having kind of just more adoption in general. And so I think the highest priority for me would be we should enable this one way or another. Whether that involves actually adding a proprietary target, I don't actually know. Like for this, I wouldn't mind digging in more. But we can do that offline. But
Cool. Yeah. Well, I'm super down to dig, and I imagine there are better solutions than currently exist on both ends. But yeah, if folks are into that, then yeah, let's make that happen.
in the sense that like, so having a new target is kind of just it's unfortunate in the sense of it's just something else to think about. Like users have to think about it, or like configuration wise, and like if we could have one Rust target, that'd be way better than having the like 300 that we have right now. Obviously it's completely impractical, but there's benefit to get everyone on the same path if we can. But I would not want an ideal, at least for me personally, I don't have like an ideological stance of like we have to have the exact same everyone applicable targets and anything else can't work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm completely of the same mind. Like, this is why I'm like trying to encourage Cloudflare workers to, instead of adding the WASM as a global resource, to use the modules instead. I think that will just like work a lot better. And I think that's definitely something that's desired, but I also don't think will happen, immediately. So like in the meantime, I think that could be very cool, and people would dig it. And like there is one of the reasons using Webpack is nice is like for workers of any type, there is some kind of JS boilerplate just for the worker. And so maybe generating that too would be kind of nice, because that will always be the same. Or at least you can give boilerplate that will work. Anyways, but it sounds like people are into this, so I will start writing up some stuff. Do we think this is the type of thing that would require an RFC or
no? At least for me, I'd want to take a look at it first, and I suspect no, but it kind of depends on the scale of the changes.
In my case, I can maybe post my example with Webpack and some glue stuff, so I can take a look at it.
Cool. Yeah.
Just whenever I find myself asking, like, should it be an RFC or not, like, tends to, like, mean I should err towards yes, doing an RFC.
Yeah. I think the reason I was asking and I'm, like, confused about the answer was because I thought the argument would be about supporting proprietary company, but it's more about just, like, how we do it and design work. So doing a design work RFC sounds great. But it does not sound like the question of do we want to support that target is terribly controversial. I guess I didn't know if it was going to be a two-step process or not.
I mean, from my point of view, we shouldn't support proprietary stuff. But the thing is that Cloudflare workers or similar workers are quite common. So, I mean, there's nothing specific about it, right? So we should be able to target just like the web.
Yeah, it just turns out that, I mean, well, if you want to do it without Webpack, the V8 isolates are not quite a browser, right? And they're Cloudflare modified V8 isolates. And so if we want to try and support this sans Webpack, which I agree most people use Webpack, and that's going to be awesome, and that will work great. But as some of the Orange website showed yesterday, there are people who will go to great lengths to demonstrate that you can try and use the thing without Webpack. But I do want to be able to support that, and I think that might require a slightly different thing, just because like the Cloudflare worker runtime environment is not the same as a browser and has its own quirks, at least for the moment.
That's pretty cool. So this might be the thing I would be working on.
I know. I'm very excited about it. I'll have a buddy.
Is it possible to do it cargo subcommons, which on a plugin level, which is not cargo itself, for example, but external plugin?
You mean to support Cloudflare with a plugin?
I mean to support additional target being added as a plugin. For example, cargo subcommons. We can have a bunch of subcommons which are not cargo itself.
Yeah, I thought about that, and that was going to be my follow-up if people were particularly grumpy about trying to bake in a proprietary target into our toolchain. And that would be to like make WasmPack or WasmBindGen, pluggable in a way that you could like run it with the, Cloudflare plugin and it would do that. But if people I don't know, maybe we should, I'm going to write this up, I think. I think this sounds like clearly the question's been answered and RFC should happen. But yeah, a plugin is something I was definitely thinking about.
Cool.
I might have another one for the office hours, if that's okay. I'm kind of curious what what for Rust WASM and like the ecosystem that we're building right now, what the requirements are to start using futures, the modern futures rather than the old futures.
I think we've just been saying we're waiting for stable.
Okay.
Yeah, it's no philosophical thing or anything like that. Just, we kind of fought tooth and nail to get our tool chain and everything working on stable Rust and don't really want to undo that unless, there's a really, really good reason, right? Like I think basically that's it.
That makes sense. So that would mean stabilization of futures, but not necessarily async await, right?
Yeah. I mean, we don't have async await now, so I don't think it factors into the discussion really, right? And like our ecosystem of WASM-based futures and web-based futures isn't that big, so I think doing the one-time breaking change to switch futures models isn't a big deal.
Well, there's two things here. I just wanted to clarify. Do you mean, so we have the WasmBindGen futures crate, which is kind of how to run futures on the web, but then we also have crates that they themselves give futures. So are you curious about which of those were you wondering about, the futures 0.3 or both?
I guess both, actually.
Okay, because the runtime part, I think we could do it anytime. We just like having as a separate crate a crate to say, give me a native future, and then I will go run it. So we could do that at any time. That doesn't have any stability requirements. What we export, that I suspect does have stability requirements.
All right, that makes sense. That's nice. It's something I can like take back to like talking about like futures. It's like, oh, cool, we can like move over. It makes me very happy, this answer. So thank you.
Cool. And I imagine like, as soon as they're unstable, because they stabilized on nightly very recently, right?
So there's sort of one open issue right now, which is whether or not the Waker callback is sufficient, or whether it should be just Waker as an argument, like the callback to wake it back up, or context, which includes a Waker. There's some heated debate going on, but I believe Libs and Lang are committed to resolving that in the near term.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I was imagining that we would do both the pieces that Alex was talking about, just like boom immediately as soon as it's stable. But like, yeah, we could expose like an unstable future flag or something that turns on nightly futures or something.
I don't think it should be too long. I think we're talking weeks before it's stabilized, not like months. Hopefully. I see Alex laughing there, so
Famous last words.
Yeah. But then there's the release trains, right? So add 12 weeks or something to that, right?
Fair.
It's still counted in weeks. It's fine.
Yeah. All right. Any other last sneaky agenda items? This is an agenda item sneaking into the bullet list.
With the new dance? No.
Yeah. All right. Have a great week, y'all. I'll see you next time.
There is one thing.
Oh.
Actually.
Yeah.
There's rweb.org, and there are topics. One of them is about WebAssembly. Would you like to add some information about recent updates and about Glue to this topic?
Are you a maintainer of RWeb yet?
One of them, yeah.
Okay. Perhaps. I don't have an answer off the top of my head, but I'll take a look.
Right.
It seems like a good thing to have a presence on. I don't know.
Yeah, we're currently in the process of cleaning our web yet up because it hasn't been maintained, and we 2 weeks ago it was moved to the Rust async org. So
Cool.
If people are interested.
Nice background knowledge. Cool. I will talk to. How should I get in contact with you about this stuff? I guess I can just send a pull request or file an issue with the Are We Web Yet on the async web?
We can contact on VG-WASM on Discord or through pull requests.
Cool. Okay. Cool. I'll be in contact.
Great.
And yeah. Thanks everyone. Again. See ya.